What's going on, guys? It's Cooper Codes, and in this video we have a really interesting project. We are going to make a stock trading bot that gets live news events and analyzes those events using ChatGPT. Then we are going to trade stocks based off ChatGPT's reaction to live events. As you guys can see right here, we can put a prompt into ChatGPT that asks it a specific question about a certain headline. For example, Tesla stopping plans to build Gigafactory in China. And we can use ChatGPT's reaction to the live events to trade real stocks. Let's discuss what a system like this would look like. Firstly, we have the Alpaca API. This is going to give us access to live news and also give us access to trading. We can connect to the live news data source by using WebSockets, which is something we are going to cover in this tutorial. We also have the ChatGPT API. This allows us to communicate with ChatGPT from our JavaScript backend. So now we can discuss what this system is going to look like step by step. Firstly, we are going to receive a news event. Then we are going to get the headline of the news event. We are going to then ask ChatGPT what it thinks of a certain headline. Then we can use the ChatGPT response to trade on whatever logic we want. For example, let's say we ask ChatGPT for a score of 1 to 100, where 100 is very good and 1 is, the worst pretty much. And so with this score above right here, we can make all of our trading logic. For example, my logic is going to be very simple. If the score is greater than or equal to 70, I'm going to buy stock. Otherwise, in an else if condition, the score is less than or equal to 30, I'm going to sell stock. And something I really want to emphasize about this tutorial is that you can have whatever logic you want and you can ask ChatGPT whatever you want. You can also do things such as implement your own databases to call on your backend and a bunch of other stuff. And so this basic logic here is pretty much the overall system that we are going to create. Before we get into code, let's go over to the Alpaca API and the OpenAI API to get our API keys so we can actually make calls from our backend. Just to explain Alpaca a little bit, is you can trade with real money with real stocks if you want, but for this video we are going to be using something called paper trading. That just means like fake trading, but it's like one-to-one the same exact experience as if you were to trade real money. And Alpaca has one of the best APIs for trading real stocks. So it's super simple. You can just press sign up and go through the whole process. I already have an account, so I'm going to log in, but sign up, you're going to get to the same screen as me. Once you're logged in, you should see a screen like this where it's like, verify your identity, what's your finances. Don't worry about this. Initially, we have a paper trading account. So you can just ignore this screen and go over to your home right here at the top left. You'll see in making this video, I made some trades. I actually made $1.07, so get crazy. But remember guys, this is fake trading. In order to get our API keys for Alpaca, we're going to go to the right next to quick trade here and press view API keys. We are then going to press regenerate right here or generate new API key if you're on a completely brand new account. And then you're going to have these three values. We need to save all these to a text file. So I'm going to take the endpoint here and say endpoint is here. The key is this, and then the secret is this. And that's everything we need to connect to Alpaca. And so to get started with OpenAI, we need to go to platform.openai.com. You're going to want to log into the OpenAI platform. Once you're logged in, you should be met with a screen like this. You're going to want to go to the top right, press view API keys, and then you're going to have all your API keys. And then we can make a new API key by saying create new secret key right here. Now we're going to copy paste this over to that text file we made and just say OpenAI API key is equal to that string there. Now we have all the authentication we need to make a trading system using both Alpaca Markets and OpenAI. So now we can get into the code. So to make our basic JavaScript project, I'm going to initialize an empty package.json by saying npm init -- yes. This just means make a package.json with the default values. We're doing this because we need to install two different packages on top of this. We need to npm install ws, which is WebSockets, which is how we're going to connect to the live news. And we also need to install the trading package, which is at alpaca hq/alpaca-trade-api. And so now your package.json should look something like this. Now we can create a server.js to hold all of our server code. And so inside of our server, we can get started by doing some pretty basic stuff. For example, we're going to say const alpaca is equal to require the @Alpaca HQ trade API. This alpaca right here is actually a constructor. And so we are going to say const lowercase alpaca is equal to a new alpaca instance. The thing with this instance is it gets defined by having environment variables. And so we need to make some specific environment variables to set up Alpaca the correct way. So we can go over to our folder here and make a .env file, which just means we are going to store environment variables in here. And so guys, these have to be the exact same names because this is what the Alpaca code is looking for. So we're going to say APCA, kind of for Alpaca, underscore API, underscore base, underscore URL is equal to. And if we go back to our text file here, we're just going to copy over these values. So the base URL is that endpoint, which we can put in right there. We can then do the APCA underscore API underscore key underscore ID is equal to, copy paste that key from over here. And then APCA underscore API underscore secret underscore key is equal to, paste in that secret from your text file. And then while we're here, we can also initialize the OpenAI underscore API underscore key, which is going to be equal to the thing we have here. Amazing. So now all of our environment variables are set up and we can use them within our server.js. I know it's kind of odd, but we don't even have to reference any of the Alpaca environment variables. What the Alpaca constructor does is it looks into your env file and sees if you have these values and just uses them by default. So if you're confused as to why we're doing nothing with them, that's why. And now very importantly, we can get access to the WebSocket object by saying const WebSocket is equal to require WS. So this isn't exactly a super in-depth WebSocket tutorial, but an easy way to understand WebSockets is we have our little server here, which can connect to a data source. The communication can go both ways. And so the data source can send us information, and we can also send data to the data source. For example, when we authenticate or we ask what data we want, we are going to be sending stuff to the actual data source itself. And an easy way to understand WebSockets for beginners is WebSockets are like push notifications. Whenever an event happens, for example, someone texts you, Snapchat, not sponsored, anything like that, you get a notification, right? And so our WebSocket is going to work in a similar way, where whenever it gets a news event, it's going to send it over to us. And so we can establish our WebSockets connection by saying const WebSocket secure is equal to new WebSocket. And just like a browser, for example, like Google Chrome, it's looking for a specific link to the WebSocket itself. The link for this project is WSS, which is a secure WebSocket, stream.data.alpaca.markets/v1 beta 1/news. And so once we actually connect the WebSocket, we can listen for the event of WebSocket secure.on. We can then look for a certain event. For example, on the open event, we want to run certain logic inside of a callback function here. We can say console.log WebSocket connected. But just like if you were to log into a website like Google and you wanted to access like your Google Drive, we now have to log into the data source. And so how do we log in? We are going to make an object, for example, const auth message is equal to a handful of different things. This is defined in the Alpaca documentation, but we are going to send an action over that is of authentication. This object also wants two different things. It wants the key, which is saved in the process.env. So inside of our environment variables, we have the APCA underscore API underscore key underscore ID. And then the secret, which is the process.environment.apca underscore API underscore secret underscore key. And so this is very similar to just logging in with a username and password. Like I said above, the data in a WebSockets connection goes both ways. And so now we can send data over to the data source. So we can say WebSocket secure.send json.stringify the auth message object we just made above. So this is going to send the auth data to the WebSocket. And assuming our login information is correct, is going to kind of log us in. And why do we need to be logged in? It's because we need to log in to be able to get access to the data in the first place. And so now we can actually get that data by subscribing to all news feeds. To make this tutorial simple, I'm going to subscribe to the news of every single stock in the world. We can do that by making a subscribe message. So const subscribe message is equal to, the action is going to be of subscribe. And then the news is going to be an array with a star string in it. The star here just means all or every single stock. If I wanted to specifically look at a Tesla stock and all the news related to Tesla, I could say an array with just TSLA in there. And then I would only get data from the WebSocket that was of the Tesla stock. And so now we can use our WebSocket secure object and send this exact subscribe message over. And so this send right here at line 32, that is what is connecting us to the live data source of news. And so now we actually have live data, we connect the WebSocket and we do our authentication in a nice and clean way. The thing is, we are not looking for any messages coming from our news source. So we are going to go down here and say WebSocket secure.on. So a similar method to what we used above, but instead we are going to say message. So when we receive a message from the WebSocket itself, we can then use a function to see what that message is. And I'm going to use an asynchronous function here because we are going to be calling other APIs inside of this kind of logic here. And so to run some functionality and just see that everything's working initially, we can say console.log, the message is plus message. So inside of our console, assuming you have Node installed, we are going to say node server.js, and you should see these messages, which is connected, authenticated, and then it's pretty much responding to us that yes, you are subscribed to the news. We are listening to live news data, and so you might have to wait a couple seconds to see the actual news come in. It's what you would expect. You don't want random news events to happen, right? And so I'm just going to wait a second and make sure that we have at least one news event that comes in. An interesting thing to discuss while we wait for this news event is that the message we get from the on message event isn't always going to be a news event. For example, you see that we have a type of success, and a type of subscription in the messages. For this data source, if the T is equal to a N, that means that it is a news event. All right, we got a news event. This is good news. So I'm going to close my server and we can take a look at what we got. We can see that it says the message is of type news. So we got a live news event from the actual data source. And you'll see the headline is breaking news. This analyst is bullish on Rent the Runway. All right, we might want to trade that stock soon. And so we can look at this JSON in a prettier way by, I'm just going to copy it. All right, I was having issues copying that other event, but here is a different event from the exact same API. And we can get an idea of what different characteristics we can get from a certain news event. For example, the main things I'm going to care about in this video are the headline here, so we can give that to ChatGPT, and then these symbols. We are going to trade based off the symbols in this array. To give you an idea of the system, once again, is we can take this headline, Granite wins 90 million thing, seems important. And if ChatGPT says, hey, this is really positive for the company, it's a score of 90, then we're going to say, okay, we're going to go and buy a bunch of the GVA stock before everyone else gets in, right? I've heard YouTubers say this before, but I'll just put this in here so I don't get sued. None of this is financial advice. This is more just to show you guys how to work with live data. Trade at your own risk, okay. So let's go back to our code and start implementing some of the logic for parsing this data. An initial thing to understand is that this message is always a string when you use this WebSockets message here. And I'm going to make a very simple const here. It says const current events is equal to json.parse the message here. You'll also see that this message, I know this is a bunch of information, sorry guys, but this message is technically in an array and it's the first thing in the array. I don't know why that was the design choice, but fair enough. And so what we're going to do is we're going to get this entire thing and parse it to a JSON format. And then we are going to get the first thing in the array that it parsed, which is going to be our actual news event. And as we kind of hinted towards here, we only want to process these events if they're a news event and not like a subscribe or any other action. So we can say if the current event.t, so the type of the event is equal to the lowercase n, because as we can see in our object here, it says lowercase n right there for the news. This means that we then have a news event. So now I'm going to comment out the logic from here. First things first is we are going to ask ChatGPT its thoughts on the headline. And then we are going to make trades based on the output. In this specific video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for a score that is from 1 to 100, 1 being the most negative and 100 being the most positive impact on a company. So the logic for this video is going to be if the score is greater than or equal to 70, then buy the stock, which we're going to talk about how to do that exactly, of course. The impact is less than or equal to 30, sell all of stock of a certain company. All right, so now that we have that commented out, we can go to the top here and get the ChatGPT stuff going. So for ChatGPT, when we make an API request, we want to have an API request body that kind of simulates a conversation if you were to have a conversation with ChatGPT. So we can say const API request body is equal to an object. The model that we are going to be using is going to be GPT-3.5-turbo, and then it requires a messages array. So pretty much an array of messages. The first message we're going to have, and these messages are stored in objects, by the way, is its role is going to be a system role. So it means the initial role as to how ChatGPT should talk to us. And we can tell it in the content of the message exactly how we want it to talk. And so you can mess with these as much as you want, but for me, I'm going to say only respond with a number from 1 to 100 detailing the impact of the headline. When I was doing the testing on my own, this seemed like the one that was working the best for me, but you can try out whatever you want. Now we can make another role, which is going to be our user role. This means this is now us asking a question about a certain headline. And so inside of the content, we can say, given the headline, and I'm going to do single quotes to kind of wrap around the headline so it knows exactly what it is. And we can do plus current event dot headline. And if you're like, where's this dot headline coming from? It is coming from, this is the current event object right here, and the headline property is right here, and it's going to show us that headline. Big surprise. And so we can finish this statement by putting an end quote at the end there, so make sure to include that. And although we said it in the prompt, I found it to work best when I did a comma here, and I said again, show me a number from 1 to 100 detailing the impact of this headline. I know it's repetitive to what we said before, but it's what worked best for me. And so just so you guys get the full thing, given the headline, current event.headline, show me a number from 1 to 100 detailing the impact of this headline. So now our request body is good to go. So we can actually call the request by saying await fetch https://api.openai.com/v1/chat/completions. A lot of slashes there, guys, but this is the link to talk to OpenAI, specifically ChatGPT. We can then do a comma and then create an object to pass in a bunch of different properties for this specific endpoint. We want to make sure to add a method, which is going to be of post. We are sending data over to ChatGPT asking for a response, and so that is a post. Then the headers of the actual response are incredibly important. The authorization header is going to be equal to bearer space and then our bearer token or authorization token, which is stored in process.env.openai_API_key. And so .env over here, remember that we have this environment variable that is saving that OpenAI API key that we got from before. And then the content dash type is going to be of application/JSON. Oh, and my bad, this should not have an M there. It should be a comma at the end, so it should look like this. Now, finally, we need to pass in the body. So what information are we actually sending over to the OpenAI ChatGPT? So we can say json.stringify the API request body that we created above. So pretty much we're asking for a ChatGPT response to this conversation we created right here. As you guys can see, fetch returns a promise. And so when we get that promise, we are then going to say .then get the data returned from OpenAI. We can then say return data.json. This data.json gives the ChatGPT data in a JSON format for us to use within JavaScript. So we can then say .then data, do another arrow function, and now we have the actual response from ChatGPT. So data is the ChatGPT response. So you can even say console.log data if you like to see that in your console. I'm decently familiar with the ChatGPT API, so I'm also going to console.log the data.choices of 0.message. This is where your ChatGPT message is going to be stored, but we can also just run our server again and see the actual response in real time and see that it works as well. So we can go to node server.js, run that. And so as you wait for a news event to come in, we can also make a variable at the top here, which is going to be let company impact be equal to 0 initially. And this is just a way for us to store the response from ChatGPT because it's going to give us a 1 to 100, right? And so once we get our response from ChatGPT and see what that is, we can set the company impact equal to the certain string. Oh guys, I've made a rookie mistake. So the message up here should be messages. That's completely my bad. So it should be messages, not message for your API request body if you're following along. Once we run our code again, we should be able to see that response from ChatGPT once the event gets fired. Also, if you're waiting for a decent chunk of time in between news events, or there's a time of day where there's just not a lot of news events, feel free to just continue along with the tutorial. The thing about initially creating an API based off live news is it's dependent on live news, right? And so we only really get a kind of working solution once we get live news events coming in. You could also make a test API that does all the functionality here, but has, a pre-made event for you. For example, a pre-made current event that has a, whatever properties we want to use within that current event. And that's another way you could test this API if you don't want to be so reliant on the actual live news that we're using. All right, so I've gotten a response here. So I'm going to Control C and we can analyze the response in a second. So we can see this as Binance frees 18 million Ethereum staked, cash in your BETH now. And so you'll see this actually includes crypto symbols as well. And so it's not just stock symbols. You buy and sell them the exact same way. And so you'll see this is a 60 overall for Ethereum USD. So that's saying it's kind of positive, but not really much is going on, right? But we can see that when we console.log right here, that is this role right here and the message right here. So to get the content of the message, we are going to say message.content. It's going to give us that 60. And so that company impact variable we made above can be set equal to the parse int of the data.choices of 0.message.content. We're doing a parse int here because this right here is going to be a string 60. And so what we're doing is we're pretty much taking the string 60 and turning it into a regular 60 like that, or an integer 60. And so I could kind of change this comment at line 68, say make trades based on the output of the impact, saved in company impact. And so if the company impact is greater than or equal to 70, we can do something. And else if the company impact is less than or equal to 30, we can do something else. And so inside of here, we are going to buy stock. And inside of the other thing, we are going to sell stock. We can also get access to the actual ticker symbol that we are going to be trading with by saying const ticker symbol is equal to current event dot symbols, which is going to be an array. And I'm just going to take the first thing in the array. And again, to show this example, the symbols array is right here in our object. And you'll see the first thing is going to be the company it's talking about. You can change your code to where if this array length has a bunch of different symbols inside there, which does happen, don't trade on that because ChatGPT is looking for one specific symbol. But just to make things simple, I'm always going to trade off the first symbol here. And so buying stock with Alpaca is actually super simple. We can say let order be equal to await alpaca.create order. And just to show some documentation here, this is on the npm package documentation for the Alpaca Trade API, is you have all of these different things you can use to create a stock order. I'm going to be using the most simple way of trading stocks in this video, which is just buying and selling. No crazy like long shorts or anything crazy. And so when we create an order, we want to say the symbol here, which is going to be that ticker symbol we created above, the quantity, which is just going to be an amount of how many we want to buy. For example, I want to buy one stock is what I'm going to do by default. So if we see a positive event, we're just going to buy one stock of this. Which side of the trade are we on? Well, we are on the buying side for this case. Which type of trade are we doing? Well, we are doing a trade in the market. You'll see the type here also has access to limits, stop limit, stuff like that. I'm just going to do a simple market buy or sell. And then I'm going to do a simple time underscore in underscore force is equal to day. This isn't exactly like a complete Wall Street tutorial, right? But day is nice because if the day ends, it won't trade. And so you can imagine with a live news event, within like, a couple hours, the market might adjust to that event. So if the day ends, it's not going to actually buy the stock or sell the stock, for example. And it's one of the more simple ways to create orders with the API as well. And that is all we need right there. And else if we can sell the stock. Selling stock is actually surprisingly simple on Alpaca. It's literally just let the close position be equal to alpaca.close position of a certain stock. I'm just going to say the ticker symbol we made above. And so you see, I'm going to take these comments and put them where they should belong. And right now, if you ran this system, it would work. It would let you buy and sell everything here. And so let's go over the logic of this trading just one more time. So once we receive a message from our WebSockets, we are going to process that message and see if the message is a news event. Then we are going to create a company impact variable just to start. And then we are going to ask ChatGPT what it thinks of a certain current event.headline. Once we get the number that ChatGPT believes is the impact on a certain company, we are saving that number inside the company impact variable here. Then we're getting the ticker symbol we actually want to trade with. And then this is where all of our trading logic happens. I believe I mentioned this at the beginning of the tutorial, but anything that you can do in backend JavaScript can happen in this section of the code. And so if you have more advanced ways of trading, you only want to do one trade per hour, you want to do logic like that, that is everything that you can make in this kind of part of the code here, once we're actually executing the trades. And so I'm actually just going to modify the code in a pretty significant way just to kind of show you guys how it works. So I'm going to say if the company impact is greater than or equal to 0, then we are going to buy whatever stock is on that certain news event. And so now we can run our code again, node server.js. And when this next news event happens, it's going to take the first symbol and then instantly buy it. And you'll see it looks like we got no errors. So we can go over to our Alpaca client in a second here. And you'll see if we leave this thing running, we are going to be making some purchases over time. But this is just an example of the actual buy order 100% going through. And we've already lost 1 cent. So that is great news. All right, we got another event. I'm going to close the server just for a second. I actually want to discuss something interesting here. This first event we received was analysts predict Shopify revenue growth to exceed pre-COVID levels, sees significant upside. ChatGPT rated that as an 80. And so that is actually something that would have actually bought if we had the regular code. See, our company impact is greater than or equal to 70, which I'm going to change it back to. And it's interesting it rated it an 80 because I think you guys would agree that, Shopify revenue growth doing well, it kind of means a buy for Shopify. And so I'm just showing you guys that this isn't just completely like, oh, we're making some random data project. You can use ChatGPT to have trading logic, which I think is really interesting. And guys, you don't have to copy these parts of the tutorial because I'm like modifying these numbers like in a dumb way, but I'm going to make this company impact greater than 120. So it, never happens, for example. And I'm going to make this company impact in the else if be 100. And so we're pretty much going to be forced to close our position. And guys, like I said, you don't have to copy this, but I'm just going to show you an example. Is we are going to sell off our Shopify shares. So that was ticker symbol shop. And so now if we run our server again, we are going to sell pretty much as soon as it happens. And guys, again, don't copy these numbers. I'm going to switch it back at the end. And this is why we do these things. It should be close position. If we go over to the actual documentation, which is the Alpaca Trade API JS right here, we can look up close position and it's going to liquidate your position of a certain symbol. So very simple. So my bad, let's run that one more time with node server.js. Oh, and as you guys can see, it looks like we have no errors this time. So I'm going to close off our server. And so you'll see that closing of the position is going to sell off all of our Shopify shares at the market value. And so you'll see we lost about, 12 cents. So yeah, don't come to me for stock trading advice, okay? But this is just showing you guys that if this runs forever, it's going to be buying, selling. And so you can run something like this almost indefinitely. One last important thing to note is that your buying and selling might not be working because remember guys, when the day ends, it will not trade. And so this is a type of bot that you can run during the trading day. You can change this time in force to do different ways of trading that aren't during the day, I believe, but I didn't get into that in this tutorial. And one last thing, I'm going to put this back to 70 and this back to 30 so we can actually trade correctly. All right, so that is the entire video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this content, feel free to subscribe. I have a bunch of development related content that you're probably interested in. And hopefully this project was super interesting. I know that building this, it was definitely cool to see how ChatGPT can work with systems like live news and do analysis. So again, thank you so much for watching.